Hello, this is Daniel Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide. In a recent video, I described the chat system as the most unloved feature because it had been neglected for so long. I talked about better in-game communications as one feature all org leaders had at the top of their list of desires. Now I'm going to turn to the rest, collectively known as Orgs 2.0. Practically from the start of the current support for organizations, CIG promised that there would be an Orgs 2. And for a while, both the original forums and on Spectrum, hardly a week would go by without some sort of thread about Orgs 2. But time, the understanding that single-player Squadron 42 applicable text had a priority, and a lack of consensus about what would actually be the features of Orgs 2 eventually caused it to be forgotten. Because most of the suggestions were from org leaders talking about what would help them run their org. And since each of their orgs were different, so were their needs. Now, to be clear, in most of the MMOs I have played, my relationship with orgs has been either as a member or an outsider, not actually running one. And as of yet, I have not picked an org to join in Star Citizen, although that may change. So this is actually somewhat beneficial in that I have no current agenda as to what Star Citizen org should be like. Because what I want to do is start a conversation about Orgs 2, starting from where it must start, and that is exactly what CIG should be wanting to have orgs become more like. Now you might get defensive and say what business of theirs what my org is like, and like it or not, the character of orgs greatly affects the character of the community, both for members and non-members. And the character of the community can spoil even the best MMOs, so it is definitely something that CIG should care about. So here we go. First, what is the target size of an organization in Star Citizen? Really small sizes can't seem to do much in terms of interesting gameplay on a regular basis, and really large organizations tend to become impersonal and wind up collecting a lot of dead wood. I know I spent about 6 years employed in a Fortune 500 company and not once thought about wanting to replicate that experience in an online game. I don't think I'm alone in that feeling, but short of imposing a hard cap, what could Orgs 2 do to encourage a particular size org? Well, if you want to encourage large orgs, then you want strong support for hierarchical command and reporting structures. If you don't, then instead put a strong support in for alliances, and what might have been a huge org would gravitate towards a huge alliance of smaller orgs. But there's a bigger thing about how to encourage large orgs or not, and that is whether certain levels of rewards are locked behind levels of effort that can only practically be accomplished by large organizations. For example, if we get the ability to build our own ships, but capital ships like the 890 require quantities of work that can practically be achieved only by a group of thousands, then expect organizations of thousands to be the norm. This also goes if groups of that size can control planets, stations, jump points, etc., and then essentially create a join or die dilemma to players and expect joining one of the largest orgs to be perceived as required. Which segues to the next question. What is the role of organizations in the game setting? In some games, the setting essentially is a struggle between massive clans or corporations for dominance, and then massive organizations are clearly to be expected. But Star Citizen shares a game setting with a single-player game where we play a rookie pilot. The game setting is dominated by institutional power. The Imperator, the Advocacy, the UEE Navy, the massive economic forces like Hurston Dynamics, ArcCorp, and Microtech are features of lore. We play within the structures of massive institutions, not become them. We are the scrappy independents, the freelancers, the explorers, the settlers, the mercenaries, and ventures. We are being promised that we will have an apartment on a building with a big corporate logo on top, and not be the logo on top. So then the third question. Collective ownership or granted access. Is there literally an org fleet, org hangar, and org base? Or are these simply individual ships, etc., that the player grants rights for the org to use? Obviously, the collective ownership allows the leadership to perform global fleet planning in much more detail and specificity. The individual granted access, on the other hand, has one clear advantage, and that is less messy divorces. You get upset at current org leadership, or conversely, they ban you, and you can leave and take your stuff with you, rather than having essentially nothing for all the work you put into the org. Similarly, if the org leader runs into financial problems, or just was a con man all along, they can only sell what they owned and donated. There have, in other games, been some high-profile cases of org members logging in and suddenly discovering that everything of the org is gone. It might not even be the org leader's fault. An estate executor or a bankruptcy receiver will simply see an asset with a value and have a fiduciary responsibility to liquidate it. So the next question is, donations, dues, or taxes? Which will be permitted? To clarify, donations are entirely voluntary and anonymous. Dues are presumed to be a certain amount, and the org leaders have the ability to monitor who has and hasn't paid their dues and to take actions on their own, such as banning for non-payment. While taxes are automatically deducted anytime the player earns money at a rate the organization has set. Obviously, if part of the goal of the Orgs 2 system is to develop huge orgs with massive organization assets, then an automatic collection is a huge benefit over having to chase down individual dues payers one by one. So the presence or lack of automatic org fees is a big step in encouraging one scale of organizations or the other. Then there is the question of governing people, to reference The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
The major problem, one of the major problems, for there are several, one of the many major problems with governing people is that of who you get to do it, or rather of who manages to get people to let them do it to them.
By default, most orgs tend towards being monarchies, but that represents its own problems.
To summarize, it is a well-known and much lamented fact that those people who most want to rule people are, ipso facto, those least suited to do it.
The first of which are their decisions simply too large to feel comfortable with giving to one person.
To summarize the summary, anyone who is capable of getting themselves made president should on no account be allowed to do the job.
But even more so, what do you do when that person isn't available? At what point do you declare that the throne is vacant? Who makes that decision? Who decides who the next monarch is? And if there is no structure or any of this inside the game, how does CIG know whether they should allow a new account to have full rights to the org assets, or are they being duped into executing a coup?
To summarize the summary of the summary, people are a problem.
Then the final consideration, org reputation. Or to put it another way, should you be known by the company you keep? The first question is what should be the weight between personal and org reputation when they're not the same? Or should it be in some situations one predominates and other situations the other does? For example, you want to land at a place and we think, you're a fine guy, but your org has been prohibited, so sorry but denied. Which brings up another question. Who decides what is the reputation that the org is trying to achieve, and who decides to kick somebody who is dragging down that reputation? And then what if that person is the monarch themselves? So anyhow, my goal here was to start, or perhaps restart, a discussion about what Orgs 2.0 should be like, beginning with what is the role of orgs in the verse that CIG should be supporting with Orgs 2.0. Not because CIG should dictate what your org is, but because orgs shape the community and thus CIG has an interest in what sort of influence that is. And somewhat atypically for me, I'm going to, at least for now, not strongly advocate for one answer because I've often followed lone wolf playstyles myself, and as some would say, don't really have a dog in this fight. But CIG is starting to work on systems, such as base building and more multi-crew ship functions, that will strongly affect and be affected by how organizations function in the game. So this is the right time for these discussions to be happening. Now for an update on our giveaways, we continue to make progress towards our goals of having the giveaway of the Zippy Zazzy Zaftig Zephyr, the Zeus 2 cargo, as well as our larger goal for the magnificent multi-role mining meta, the Arasta. One entry per video, be a member for automatic entry, or comment including the secret word. And the secret word for this video is the type of company whose employment I've never wanted to recreate in a game. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Daniel Raymond for Ray's Guide.